Sid Eudy was a terrifying force of nature in the wrestling world, known for an unhinged persona and explosive power that secured him the World Championship twice in both the major leagues. But everything went off the rails in 1993 during a notorious hotel room brawl that left Arn Anderson stabbed with a pair of scissors and Sid leaking blood from multiple puncture wounds. That bloody incident is a huge reason why the WWE keeps his name off the Hall of Fame ballot, but to really get Sid, you have to go back to where it started. Born in 1960 deep in rural Arkansas, Sidney Raymond Eudy started his life a long way from the bright lights of the arena. He wasn't built in a high-tech gym. He was forged on a farm. The grueling daily labor turned him into a physical anomaly before he ever lifted a dumbbell. From sun up to sundown, he was hauling and lifting, sculpting a comic book physique through sweat and dirt rather than supplements and personal trainers. By the time he was a grown man, he stood a staggering 6'9", possessing the kind of size that made everyone in the room stop and stare. Here is the twist that makes his story so unique. Unlike almost every other icon of his era, Sid had absolutely zero interest in the sport. While legends like Bret, Hart, or Shawn Michaels spent their childhoods dreaming of championship gold, becoming a wrestler never even crossed Sid's mind. It wasn't on his radar. He didn't care about it. For most of his life, he had no desire to step between the ropes. No action figures, no Saturday morning cartoons, no backyard grappling. He was completely indifferent to the industry, which makes his rise to the top even crazier. Hit that like button if you think natural talent beats hard work, or drop a comment if you disagree. Sid tells the story like this. He was just pumping iron at a local gym when Destiny walked in wearing neon fringe and flashy sunglasses. The Macho Man himself, Randy Savage, spotted this giant across the room and walked right up to ask him point blank if he'd ever thought about getting into the ring. Of course, in the wrestling business, the truth is usually flexible, and this origin story has a second version. Lanny Poffo Savage's brother remembers the whole thing differently. According to Lanny, Sid was the one who hustled them, approaching him at a show in Memphis to ask how to break into the business. Two totally conflicting accounts. So was he scouted by a legend, or did he chase the opportunity himself? We might never know for sure, but one thing is undeniable. Sid didn't do it for the glory or the passion. He did it for the cash. With a baby on the way, he needed a paycheck fast. He famously admitted that when his wife got pregnant, wrestling just looked like the quickest way to stack some paper. Forget the art of wrestling. This was just a massive guy with bills to pay and a diaper fund to fill. That cold, hard practicality set him apart from the rest of the locker room from day one. While other guys talked about bleeding for the business, Sid treated it like a regular job, one that just happened to pay better than construction work. But don't get it twisted. The man put in the work. Early tapes show a rookie who was raw but absolutely magnetic. In his early Continental Championship matches, he tossed opponents around with such violence that the fans in the front row actually flinched. For a rookie that size, he moved like a cat. He terrified his opponents, and honestly, with that natural athleticism, he probably should have. While other guys spent years starving on the indie circuit, promoters took one look at Sid and saw dollar signs immediately. You can't teach being 6'9" and scary. The bosses knew right away they had a gold mine on their hands. Naturally, shooting to the top that fast made a lot of the veterans jealous. They hated that he hadn't paid his dues the hard way. Sid didn't lose sleep over locker room politics. He was laser-focused on maximizing his revenue in the shortest window possible. That mercenary mindset ruled his career. While others played creative games, Sid made every decision based on a single factor. Where is the biggest check? In a shady industry, he was surprisingly good at looking out for number one. He knew exactly what a giant with his look was worth to a promoter. If the money wasn't right, he'd walk. That's a superpower in a world where everyone else is terrified of getting fired. Ironically, not being a fan saved him. He didn't have stars in his eyes. He saw the ring for what it was, a workplace. No dreams of legacy, just logic. Get paid, get out. That simple rule guided every move he made and helped him survive the Shark Tank. A lot of his peers ended up broken and bankrupt, but Sid's business-first attitude kept his bank account healthy and his body mostly intact. It is wild how fast he climbed the ladder, considering he didn't even like the sport. While technicians spent decades perfecting holds, Sid got over just by standing there and looking menacing. Within 2 years of his debut, he was commanding a salary that veterans would kill for. But that attitude also led to his biggest controversies. He never faked it. He wasn't a company man. He was a businessman in a carnival. Since he didn't know the moves yet, his first gimmick had to cover up his inexperience literally. They didn't debut him as Sid. They rolled him out as Lord Humongous, a hockey-masked nightmare ripped straight from the movies. It was a brilliant move. Put a mask on the monster so nobody notices he's still learning the ropes. When he stomped out in 1987, nobody knew they were looking at a future world heavyweight champion. They straight up lifted the look from the Road Warrior hockey mask, leather chains, the works. That face covering was more than just a prop. It was a safety net hiding both who he was and what he didn't know, letting his massive size do the talking where his skills fell short. The genius behind the Lord Humongous gimmick was a two-pronged attack. First, it kept Sid's real identity in the dark, allowing him to stumble through his rookie phase without wrecking his future marketability. Second, it leaned heavily on his terrifying physique, meaning he didn't have to be a technical wizard on the mat to get over. Nobody bought a ticket to see a post-apocalyptic warlord put on a wrestling clinic. They paid for carnage, and behind that hockey mask, a star was quietly being born. Even though he was green as grass, Sid already had that magnetic aura, making every limited movement feel like a major event. His attacks were simple, but they looked devastating, and honestly, you can't fake being 6'9" with the agility of a linebacker. That character worked so well because it amplified exactly what nature gave him. With the mask on and the mic off, all eyes were glued to his terrifying stature, freeing him from the pressure of putting on five-star classics so he could just smash people. That aura over ability mindset became the playbook for his entire run in the business. Down in Continental Championship Wrestling deep in Alabama, he was miles away from the bright lights of the WWF or the prestige of Jim Crockett's territory. That smaller pond was the perfect laboratory for Sid to experiment without millions of critics analyzing his every move. He got to mix it up with seasoned pros who could walk him through the basics and show him how to squeeze every ounce of value out of his size. Then things went global when he took his talents to New Japan Pro Wrestling under the moniker Vicious Warrior. That trip changed everything as the Japanese office basically molded him into the second coming of Bruiser Brody, one of the most revered foreign monsters to ever step foot in a Japanese ring. Drawing a parallel to Brody wasn't just a marketing ploy. Brody became a legend by being a wild, uncontrollable brawler, not by executing perfect suplexes. It was the ultimate blueprint for Sid, proving that looking like a nightmare was way more profitable than knowing 1,000 holds. Those tours overseas added some real grit to his game. The stiff, hard-hitting Japanese style forced him to make his punches look and feel legitimate. Plus, the brutal travel schedule turned his conditioning into iron. But the biggest takeaway was the psychology of doing less to achieve more, a lesson that paid off huge dividends as he bounced between different American companies with different styles. When he returned stateside, he evolved into Sid Vicious for world-class, ripping the name straight from the legendary Sex Pistols bassist. Dropping the mask was his coming-out party, revealing a character that was dangerous, unhinged, and totally unpredictable, just like he looked. The Sid Vicious brand was a game-changer because it gave him a persona that could work anywhere. Lord Humongous was stuck in a specific costume, but Sid Vicious was a versatile force of nature. That adaptability was his golden ticket as he jumped between the major promotions later on. From the masked madman to the vicious warrior, every step on the ladder was about cementing his status as a powerhouse. Bouncing around those territories taught him exactly how to sell himself in this industry. Those smaller regional shows were the ultimate incubator for his developing persona. It's not like today where guys get thrown on national TV before they're ready. Sid had the luxury of the old-school path. Sticking to the shadows of Alabama and Japan let him hide his growing pains and keep the fans from seeing him mess up. This wasn't an accident. Promoters have always known that you have to treat giants with kid gloves. For every undertaker that makes it big, there's a pile of big men who flopped because they were exposed too soon. By keeping him hidden in the territories, they protected their investment and gave him time to figure it out. Please go ahead and hit that like button if you think modern wrestling needs more true giants like Sid. It really helps the channel grow. The business is all about hiding the negatives and highlighting the positives, and Sid was a charisma machine with limited moves. The fix was simple: give him a gimmick that made him look invincible and covered up the holes in his game. Lord Humongous didn't need technical skills. He just needed to look like he could tear you in half. By the time the big leagues came calling, he understood that wrestling didn't have to be complicated to put butts in seats. He learned that sheer intensity and a couple of devastating power moves were worth more than a technical clinic ever would be. That philosophy was his ticket to gold, and the national stage was waiting. In 1989, he answered the call, storming into WCW to form the Skyscrapers, a team that had promoters seeing dollar signs. Standing nearly 7 feet tall next to Dan Spivey, they were a visual spectacle that dwarfed everyone else on the roster. Commentary would go nuts over their combined height of nearly 14 feet, selling them as literal giants among men. They absolutely steamrolled through the enhancement talent, looking like unstoppable monsters. TV viewers couldn't look away as they tossed full-grown men across the ring like they were rag dolls. Decked out in black, they were a unified force of destruction, and the WCW brass knew they had something massive on their hands. Back when raw size was the only thing that mattered, they locked down two absolute giants who could legitimately terrorize any squad on the roster. Their rise wasn't accidental, it was a carefully engineered scheme. They fed them quick, brutal victories to build an aura of invincibility, while conveniently hiding the fact that they were green as grass in the ring. For Sid, this was the perfect setup. It let him flex that terrifying look of his without exposing how little he actually knew about wrestling mechanics. But the whole Skyscraper project started shaking during a major clash with the Steiner brothers in November 1989. Sid took a punctured lung and a broken rib for his troubles. Those were real-deal injuries that killed their momentum dead just as they were sniffing championship gold. But while he was sitting at home healing, a pattern started to form that would define his whole life. Word on the street was that Sid was out there swinging bats on the softball field, supposedly, while he was too banged up to work a match. When that gossip hit the WCW office, specifically the ears of Booker Ole Anderson, it was war. In Ole's book, disrespecting the business like that was the ultimate sin. The bill came due the second Sid walked back through the curtain 7 months later. Just like a building with its supports kicked out, the monster persona they built for him was deliberately demolished. Insiders knew it was a hit job. They booked Sid to get crushed by Lex Luger in exactly 26 seconds. You just didn't see guys with Sid's star power get humiliated like that. Giants were supposed to be protected assets. This was a loud and clear memo from the top brass, basically telling him, go play softball if you want, but this ring pays your mortgage and we don't tolerate divas. Even with that public spanking, Sid's look was just too money to waste in the star-starved landscape of 1990. In a twist nobody saw coming, he got the golden ticket and induction into the Four Horsemen, the most elite crew in the game. Standing next to Ric Flair, Sid became the muscle, a spot that made him a made man overnight. It was like taking a rookie from the streets and dropping him straight onto a championship dynasty. Wearing those colors meant you were the best of the best, a spot usually reserved for the sharpest workers in the industry. Putting him in there proved that management saw dollar signs in him regardless of the softball drama. Running with the Horsemen, his stock went through the roof. Rubbing shoulders with Flair gave him instant status, and being a bad guy fit his scary vibe like a glove. It all led up to a massive headline bout against Sting for the title. They squared off at Halloween Havoc 1990, marking the first time Sid was truly trusted to carry a major pay-per-view main event. He didn't walk out with the belt, but his spot on the card felt locked in. He was in the top faction fighting the top hero. Logic said he was being groomed to rule the heavyweight scene for the next decade. The table was set for a long, rich career, but behind the curtain, Sid was already looking at the exit door. Even while he was throwing up the four fingers, he was secretly cutting deals with the World Wrestling Federation, the big rival up north. When Vince dangled a fatter paycheck and promised him the moon, Sid didn't hesitate. It was strictly business. He chased the cash and the brighter lights, walking away from a spot next to Flair that most guys would kill for. And hey, if you're enjoying this look into the darker side of the ring, go ahead and smash that like button so he can keep bringing you these untold stories. That move summed up the difference between Sid and the rest of the locker room. Most guys would starve just to say they were a horseman, but Sid stuck to his guns. To him, wrestling wasn't a passion project, it was a hustle. Loyalty meant nothing if the guy across the street was offering a better retirement plan. For the WCW suits who spent time and money building him up, him walking out was a massive blow. They handed him the keys to the kingdom, and he used them to drive straight to the competition. Taking the quick cash over the long game became Sid's trademark, for better or for worse. In hindsight, that first run was the trailer for the rest of his movie. He'd climb to the mountaintop, look ready to rule the world, and then boom, something would happen, usually something weird to derail the whole train. Explosive success followed by a bizarre exit became the recurring theme of his life. So when Vince McMahon needed a giant to team up with Hulk Hogan in the summer of 1991, he picked the strangest option available, a 6'9" monster who looked like he ate kids for breakfast. They rebranded him Sid Justice. The name screamed fair play, but the guy wearing it looked like a total psychopath. That weird rebrand kicked off one of the oddest chapters in wrestling history, sending Sid on a wild ride from referee stripes to the main event of WrestleMania to the softball diamond. He burst onto the scene as the special guest referee at SummerSlam 1991. He stood there towering over Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior as they took on the triangle of terror, Slaughter, Mustafa, and Adnan. Right away, he looked like a titan, physically matching the biggest heroes in the company. The fans cheered, but something felt wrong. The guy just radiated villain energy. With that death stare and that massive frame, trying to sell him as a smiling rule enforcer was laughable. It was like trying to cast a slasher movie villain as a kindergarten teacher. Fans will buy into a lot of crazy stuff. They'll accept zombies, snake charmers, and trash men in spandex. But asking them to believe this terrifying giant was a nice guy, that was pushing it too far. The 1992 Royal Rumble was supposed to be the turning point. In the heat of the moment, Sid tossed the fan-favorite Hulk Hogan over the top rope, triggering a massive showdown that finally cemented his turn to the dark side. You didn't need a translator for that crowd reaction. The arena erupted, proving he was born to play the villain. It felt completely organic because the fans had been sensing that bad attitude lurking behind his hero act for a while. That moment sparked one of the most debated booking choices of the early 90s. Everyone had their hearts set on a dream match at WrestleMania 8 between Hogan and the newcomer Ric Flair. Instead, the company pulled a swerve, booking Hogan against Sid Justice for the main event, a move that bummed out a lot of fans before the bell even rang. Look, Sid was a physical specimen and knew how to get heat, but let's be honest, he wasn't the nature boy. Die-hard wrestling fans who had waited years to see Hogan and Flair clash on the big stage felt like they got ripped off. Through no fault of his own, Sid became the consolation prize for a match that nobody really asked for. By the time WrestleMania 8 rolled around on April 5, 1992 at the Hoosier Dome, the main event was already fighting an uphill battle. Could they win the crowd back? Could Sid prove he was worthy of that top spot? The match was okay. It was standard Hogan fare, lots of posing and power moves, zero technical skill. But the ending, that was a total disaster. Hogan dropped the leg for the win, but Sid kicked out at 2.9 seconds, literally a split second too late. Here is the mess. The referee counted to 3 anyway. The whole arena saw Sid's shoulder pop up, but they rang the bell and gave it to Hogan. Talk about awkward. That botched finish was the perfect metaphor for Sid's entire run, great on paper, but a train wreck in execution. Before we dig into the backstage chaos, smash that like button if you want to see more deep dives into wrestling's wildest scandals. Now behind the scenes, things were even uglier. Right around WrestleMania, Sid flunked a drug test, violating the substance abuse policy. Just another headache in an already rocky stint. Showing just how flexible the rules were for top stars, they let him work the main event and the European tour before forcing him to serve his time. It really highlighted the double standards between the main event talent and the mid-card guys back then. What happened next cemented Sid's legacy as the king of baffling career moves. Instead of taking the suspension and coming back to a top spot, he just quit, walked right out the door. The reason? Softball, you heard me. He left the biggest wrestling promotion on the planet to play in a recreational softball league. Most fans couldn't wrap their heads around it. Who walks away from WrestleMania money to play amateur sports on the weekend? But for Sid, wrestling was just a paycheck, not a passion. If it didn't make dollars, it didn't make sense. While other guys were destroying their bodies for a shot at glory, Sid made it clear this was just a job to him. He was ready to walk away the second it stopped fitting his lifestyle. What makes this detour even wilder is that he was booked to feud with the Ultimate Warrior when he came back. He wasn't getting demoted. He was tossing away a golden ticket that most wrestlers would kill for. Years later, he claimed there was more to it than just the softball games. He mentioned being fed up with his character's direction and admitted the failed drug test made things awkward with management. Whatever the real reason, that sudden exit was classic, Sid totally unpredictable. If you think the softball saga is weird, just wait until we get to that hotel room in Blackburn, England in 1993. 24 stab wounds, 2 wrestlers bleeding out, and a world title shot washing away in a pool of blood. This was the night Sid nearly became a murderer. After ditching the WWF, he resurfaced in WCW later that year. He came back with a fresh vibe as the mystery heavy for Colonel Robert Parker. They paired him with Vader to form the Masters of the Powerbomb, easily one of the scariest tag teams ever assembled. With two giants crushing people, it looked like a winning formula, but backstage the brass had even bigger plans. They had already filmed promos with him as the World Heavyweight Champion, setting the stage for him to dethrone Vader at Starrcade 1993. After years of false starts and stopped pushes, he was finally inches away from being the undisputed top guy in a major company. But it all fell apart during a routine European tour in October. It started innocently enough at the hotel bar. According to witnesses like Too Cold Scorpio Sid and the veteran Arn Anderson started talking shop. Sid was venting about how the company needed to focus more on the big powerhouses. Arn pushed back, defending the old-school technicians who could actually wrestle. Add alcohol to the mix and the vibe turned dark fast. It got personal. Sid reportedly snapped, accusing Arn of being jealous because management was grooming him for the title. Anderson fired back, telling Sid he would never have the work ethic the real pros did. When the rest of the locker room couldn't cool things down, both men eventually retreated to their separate hotel rooms. That should have been the end of it, but unfortunately it wasn't. Witnesses say Sid marched up to Anderson's room a short time later and started pounding on the door like a maniac. He screamed through the wood that they weren't finished talking yet. The second Anderson cracked that door open, the verbal spat instantly exploded into a physical brawl. One wrestler who wanted to stay anonymous described hearing shouting followed by crashing sounds and terrified screams. By the time anyone got there, the scene was absolutely covered in blood. A pair of hotel scissors, the cheap kind usually found next to the notepad and pens, turned into deadly weapons in what became one of the most infamous real-life fights in wrestling history. In the chaotic struggle for survival that followed, Anderson ended up with around 20 stab wounds, while Sid himself took 4 hits during the melee. The hotel hallway looked more like a grisly crime scene than a place to sleep as other wrestlers and road agents scrambled to pull the two giants apart. Paramedics were called in immediately and both men needed hospital care. People who were there said if they hadn't broken it up right, then one of them might not have made it out alive. WCW executives were suddenly staring down a massive crisis. They were in the middle of an international tour and now 2 of their top stars were laid up in a hospital bed. Their first instinct was to try and hush it up, but good luck keeping a secret in the gossip-fueled world of pro wrestling. The news tore through the locker room. Wrestling journalist Dave Meltzer reported that a bunch of the boys threatened to walk out right then and there if Sid wasn't given the pink slip immediately. The scissors incident crossed a line that even the lawless Wild West nature of the wrestling business couldn't turn a blind eye to. Neither Sid nor Anderson wanted to get stuck in England for the 90 days required for a police investigation. Since both guys refused to press charges and just wanted to get back to the United States for medical help, the police dropped the case, leaving the punishment strictly up to WCW. The company didn't hesitate to make the hard call. Sid was cut from his contract. His scheduled championship win at Starrcade 1993 was thrown in the trash, along with all the posters featuring him. In an industry that usually tolerates bad behavior if you draw money, Sid had finally pushed it too far. For Anderson, even though he was badly hurt, the path forward was a lot more secure. Being a respected veteran with friends in high places, he eventually got his spot back after healing up. Since he was known as a cool-headed pro, most people assumed Sid was the one who started it. What makes this scissors brawl such a huge deal in wrestling lore is how it completely derailed a massive push. Please hit the like button if you want to see more deep dives into these crazy backstage stories. History is full of backstage scraps that become part of a wrestler's legend without actually ruining their career path. But for Sid, this was a total disaster. In one night, he went from the next world champion to being untouchable by any major promotion. The timing was brutal. WCW was just starting a creative boom under Eric Bischoff, and that world title run would have made Sid the face of the new era. Instead, he spent the next 2 years grinding in smaller territories like the USWA, rebuilding his name from scratch while waiting for the big leagues to call. The saddest part is that the incident just confirmed what everyone already suspected about him. That for all his physical gifts and charisma, he was just too volatile to be trusted with the keys to the kingdom. His look and size had gotten him out of trouble before, but the sheer violence of the scissors fight tested the absolute limit of how much nonsense promoters would put up with for a marketable star. 2 years after the Bloody Scissors incident, the wrestling world saw something that made absolutely no sense on paper. Sid Eudy, the guy fired for one of the most violent backstage altercations in history, was suddenly back on WWF TV in 1995 as Sycho Sid. And crazy enough, he wasn't stuck in the opening matches. They threw him right into the mix as the monster bodyguard for the champion Shawn Michaels, one of the biggest stars in the company. Wrestling has always had a weird moral compass, but bringing Sid back proved the one golden rule of the business. Money talks and everything else walks. Former writer Bruce Pritchard said Vince McMahon couldn't stand Sid personally, but he knew the guy could sell tickets. The World Wrestling Federation was bleeding talent to rival World Championship Wrestling, who had deep pockets thanks to Ted Turner's checkbook. With heavy hitters like Kevin Nash and Scott Hall jumping ship, McMahon was desperate for established stars who could grab the audience's attention instantly. Adding the word psycho to his name wasn't subtle, it was a direct nod to his real-life reputation. The WWF leaned heavily into his unstable history, marketing him as a force of nature. His entrance music even started with a creepy scream to set the vibe that this guy might snap at any second. McMahon reportedly told Sid straight up that they were simply monetizing the public's existing perception of him. At first, the pairing with Michaels worked like a charm. The visual was perfect, a 6'9" giant watching the back of the smaller, flashy showstopper. During matches against teams like Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith, the crowd would go nuts for Sid's devastating power bombs. But in wrestling, friends are just enemies waiting to happen. Sid inevitably turned on Michaels after a frustrating loss, becoming a top-tier villain overnight. That betrayal set up a main event run against the WWF champion Diesel in early 1995. Their showdown at In Your House highlighted Sid's scary presence and power while carefully hiding the fact that he couldn't wrestle long matches. But even with that massive push, the feud with Diesel just didn't click the way they hoped. A few months later, Sid was sliding down the card fighting mid-carders instead of headlining. By early 1996, he was gone from TV again. Unlike the last time, he didn't leave because of a stabbing or a scandal. They simply ran out of creative ideas for him. With 0 bookings on his schedule, Sid pulled a move that was virtually unheard of for a guy who had headlined WrestleMania only a few seasons prior. He hung up his boots and punched the clock on a regular blue-collar gig. For a hot minute, it looked like Sid was legitimately done with the squared circle. He traded the spotlight, the brutal travel, and the backstage drama for a steady paycheck. But let's be real, wrestling retirements have the shelf life of milk, especially when a golden ticket lands on your doorstep. That ticket came from a bombshell out of left field, the Ultimate Warrior's sudden and messy exit from the WWF. Warrior, who had just made his big comeback at WrestleMania 12 in 1996, immediately butted heads with the brass and was gone by June. His abrupt departure left a massive void in the roster, right when WCW was absolutely crushing them in the Monday Night Ratings war. Vince McMahon, always the ruthless businessman, picked up the phone. The deal was undeniable, a monster push, prime TV slots, and a salary that actually matched his star power. By July 1996, Sid was back on screen screaming about being the ruler of the world and smashing opponents through tables like they were cardboard. This third run wasn't just a comeback. It was a rare shot at sustained glory that almost nobody gets in this business. He returned with a laser focus, tapping into a vibe with the crowd that he had never quite hit before. His raw power game and borderline psychotic interviews made him magnetic, perfectly bridging the gap between the family-friendly new generation and the gritty attitude era looming on the horizon. The peak of this wild resurgence hit at Survivor Series 1996, where Sid knocked off Shawn Michaels to claim the WWF Championship, his first real world title in the big leagues. Madison Square Garden went absolutely ballistic as he planted Michaels with a powerbomb and listened to the ref slap the mat 3 times. It was a defining moment, Sid catching Shawn mid-air, proving that pure brute force could shut down technical wizardry any day of the week. After 10 years of chaos, burning bridges, and that infamous scissors incident that should have ended his career, Sid Eudy finally stood at the summit. This win was the ultimate proof of pro wrestling's twisted logic. Here was a guy who had torched relationships in the most dramatic ways possible. A guy who openly admitted he didn't love the sport, he just loved the cashed checks. A man who physically attacked a locker room leader was now the face of the biggest promotion on earth. The message was loud and clear: marketability trumps morality every single time. Sid's rise also pulled the curtain back on the industry's double standards. While the talent is expected to be loyal and pay their dues, promoters play by a totally different set of rules. They will roll out the red carpet for anyone past sins be damned if they think it will move merchandise or pop a rating. Even McMahon, who allegedly wasn't Sid's biggest fan personally, didn't hesitate to strap the company's top prize on him when the numbers made sense. That title reign did what his muscles and scary glare never could. It certified him as a true headliner, capable of carrying the brand even if just for a moment. For a late bloomer who treated the ring like a bank teller window, that validation must have tasted pretty sweet. Holding the winged eagle belt should have locked him in as an icon. If you are enjoying this deep dive, go ahead and smash that like button so we can keep bringing you these wrestling histories. But here is the kicker. The guy held 4 world titles across the 2 biggest companies, yet he barely gets a mention when people talk legends. How does a resume that rivals Hogan and Flair end up in the B tier of history? It all comes down to one cruel fact. Timing is everything. When he grabbed the strap at Survivor Series 1996, he leaned hard into a new persona. The master and ruler of the world gimmick leveraged his terrifying size, giving the people a champion who actually looked like he could crush you. Standing there with his fists in the air and the gold around his waist, Sid finally had the respect he had been chasing. The crowd was eating it up, chanting his name, but something weird was happening in the stands. Even with Sid as the champ, all eyes were drifting toward the explosive rivalry heating up between Bret, the Hitman Hart, and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Their war at WrestleMania 13 would go down as a masterpiece, basically lighting the fuse for the Attitude Era and changing the game forever. And Sid, the actual champion, he got swept away by the changing currents. That bad timing cursed his whole run. Just as he was cementing himself as a legit top dog, the entire industry shifted under his feet. The fans were changing too. They were getting bored with the straightforward, larger-than-life giants. They wanted grit, moral ambiguity, and layers, things Sid's powerhouse act just wasn't designed to deliver. Then came early 1997 and the infamous Lost Smile speech. Shawn Michaels hit Monday Night Raw to vacate the title he took from Sid, citing a knee injury that supposedly threatened his career. People are still arguing about the truth behind that moment to this day. Was Shawn really hurt, or did he just not want to do the job for The Undertaker at Mania? Whatever the reason, it left a massive void leading straight to Sid's second reign in February 1997 when he beat Bret Hart. On paper, that should have sealed his legacy. A 2-time champ who pinned both Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart, 2 of the greatest technicians to ever lace up a pair of boots. But even as Sid held the belt up for the second time, smart fans could feel the wind blowing in a different direction. That run barely lasted a month, ending at WrestleMania 13 against The Undertaker. It was a decent bout, the classic clash of Sid's power against Taker's methodical darkness. But let's be real, Sid got totally eclipsed again. That same night, Bret Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin put on a submission clinic that stole the spotlight and completely shifted the company's future. Sid ended up being just another notch on The Undertaker's belt, victim number 6 in the streak. But honestly, people barely talk about that compared to the iconic blood-soaked visual of Austin screaming in pain. After packing his bags and leaving the WWF, the big man fell off the radar, vanishing from the major promotions for almost 2 years. When he finally resurfaced in 1999, he had a shiny new gimmick, WCW's Millennium Man. It was a clear attempt to cash in on the Y2K panic while ripping off Bill Goldberg's undefeated streak vibe. The crowd popped for a minute when he came back, but let's be honest, that hype died fast once everyone realized just how messy WCW's creative team had become. By '99, the company was showing serious cracks in the foundation, booking decisions were changing daily, and the roster was stuffed with legends past their prime. Even with a decent push, Sid's Millennium Man character got swallowed up by the chaos. Trying to build a Goldberg-style monster felt cheap and uninspired, especially since the real Goldberg was still right there in the locker room. Despite the mess, Sid still managed to snag the WCW World Heavyweight Championship twice in the year 2000. On paper, that should have been the peak of his career, proof that he was a top guy across different eras and promotions. But instead, those title wins became mere footnotes. They're remembered more for happening while WCW was circling the drain than for any killer matches or storylines. Even with the big gold belt around his waist, the ratings were in free fall. By the year 2000, the company was bleeding cash and losing viewers by the second. The juggernaut that once crushed the ratings for 83 straight weeks was now desperate, throwing wild ideas at the wall, hoping anything would stick. Sid's title reigns happened right in the middle of this storm, with belts hot potatoing around and storylines getting scrapped before they even made sense. This gap between winning gold and actually leaving a legacy exposes a harsh reality about the wrestling business. Just holding a championship doesn't make you a legend. It's all about the context. It's the drama, the rivals, the cultural vibe of the time, and the memories you create while holding the strap that decide how history remembers you. And man, Sid just had the worst luck when it came to timing his championship runs. His first WWF title hit during a weird transition period before the Attitude Era really took off. His second run overshadowed by the Lost Smile drama and Taker's massive WrestleMania win. Then you look at his WCW wins, which happened when the brand's reputation was already in the toilet. By then, title changes felt totally meaningless. Plus, Sid never really had that one defining feud that turns a champion into an icon. There is no Sid equivalent to Hogan versus Andre Flair versus Steamboat or Rock versus Austin. He didn't have that one rivalry fans instantly think of. He was more of a transitional champ, a bridge between eras rather than the main event himself. Now, don't get it twisted, I'm not trying to downplay what Sid did. In a brutal industry, he reached the top of the mountain multiple times. He looked the part, a terrifying giant who you actually believed could crush anyone. Most guys dream of a career like that. But the weird timing of his title wins explains why a guy with that much gold isn't always the first name brought up in the greatest of all-time debates. While his title history is complicated, nothing defined his career more permanently than what came next. Hit that like button if you want to see more deep dives into wrestling history. It really helps the channel grow. We're talking about 8 seconds of footage so gruesome that TV broadcasts still won't show the whole thing. It's crazy how one single move turned a 6'9" monster into a cautionary tale that still makes veterans wince over 20 years later. January 14th, 2001, Indianapolis. WCW's Sin pay-per-view. The company was on life support, hemorrhaging money and fans. But nobody in the arena was thinking about bankruptcy when Sid climbed the turnbuckle during a 4-way match for the world title. What happened next is hands down one of the most horrifying moments in pro wrestling history. Word on the street is that other wrestlers explicitly told him not to try any high-flying moves because of his massive size. Being over 300 pounds and pushing 40, Sid wasn't built for aerial attacks. But in this business, performers take stupid risks just to steal the show. The disaster unfolded in slow motion, feeling almost inevitable. Sid leaped off the ropes to deliver a big boot, but he landed all wrong on that massive frame. The human leg has limits, and his just gave out. It snapped like a twig, tibia and fibula gone, bones sticking out through the boot. A total catastrophe. The cameras caught the break for a split second before the production team frantically cut away, but it was too late. The image was out there. The announcers went dead silent. No more hype, no more selling the match. When they finally spoke, you could hear the genuine fear in their voices. This wasn't a storyline. This was a human being screaming in agony on live pay-per-view. The crowd went from cheering to dead silence. People were looking away, covering their eyes. Some even looked like they were going to be sick. The vibe in the building shifted instantly from a show to a medical emergency as docs rushed the ring. That image of his leg is burned into the brains of everyone who saw it. It was a brutal wake-up call about the reality behind the show. Wrestling hurts, sure, but you rarely see destruction like that. You couldn't tape this up and walk it off. That injury shattered the superhero image these giants project and showed just how fragile they really are underneath the gimmick. For Sid, the pain was just starting. He was looking at multiple surgeries, a metal rod in his leg, and a long, hellish road to recovery. We are not talking about a quick bounce back here. Coming back from a nightmare injury like that takes years, not weeks. For a guy already in the twilight of his career, it was a total disaster, and the way WCW handled the aftermath really exposed how deep in the gutter that company had fallen. Back in the glory days, a star of Sid's magnitude would have been treated like royalty and taken care of until he was back on his feet. Instead, the company was broke and on the verge of collapsing, so they basically left him high and dry, which is honestly tragic. Hit that like button if you think legends deserve better treatment when they get hurt. This wasn't a minor sprain. It was a compound fracture needing intense surgery and endless therapy, completely cutting off his cash flow. Sid was famous for treating wrestling like a business transaction rather than a passion project, so getting
on one attack. This could be the Riot Squad's moment.